introduce in a moment. But let me just go over a couple other items for you. We'll have a few handouts for you later on for some of the other events coming up this week. As you came in, there was a poster listing some of those, and many of you are available or have already seen those. But just to let you know, this is a very exciting week for us. We're so grateful for many of you that are going to take away, hopefully, things that will impact and be beneficial to you through the rest of your life. I really feel that that's the quality of things that you received here today. Let me just indicate a couple of the announcements, and then I've asked Jordan Zemp if she would offer an invocation. Let me just indicate briefly the agenda of items that are continuing on the remainder of this week for the Empower Your Dreams. On Wednesday, we will have our semifinals for the competition. That will be held, everything actually for the remainder of the conference will be held in this building, either on this side or the other side of the ballroom. So if you're involved in any of the Empower Your Dreams New Venture Camp competition, it will be in one of these two rooms. So the competition will be divided into domestic, and the other room will have international and social entrepreneurship. Will be on the back side of this wall. That will be starting at 3 o'clock Wednesday. So if you're part of that, please plan to come to that. Then that evening, there will be a great presentation. Our keynote speaker, Elder Gary Crittenden, will be addressing us at 7 o'clock right here on Wednesday. At the conclusion of his remarks, the finalists will be announced. So any of those that are semi-finalists that are hoping to find out whether they present the next 40, you'll want to come hear Gary Crittenden that evening. Gary Crittenden is the former managing partner, or is the managing partner of Huntsman Gay Global Capital, former CFO of Citigroup, American Express, Sears, it just goes on and on. We're really looking forward to hearing from him as well as all of those who participate. Following the announcement Wednesday night, Thursday will be the finals. Again, right in this room is where we'll have the finals for the competition. As they conclude that will be going between 9:30 and noon. And then following that, during the afternoon, we'll have two other big events. One is what we call Power Blast speakers. You'll be able to get the information bio on some of those speakers later on today in the handout. And there'll be a short break and then a panel discussion on everything you want to learn in college and business that you never did. So that will be another great opportunity, followed by a wrap-up concluding remarks by Mark Willis, who the Willis Center's named after Mark and Laura Willis. So we're really excited to have him. He's the former CEO of Desert Management Corp., president of General Mills. Again, his resume goes on and on, as well as being mission president here in Hawaii several years ago. So we're looking forward to all of these events. What I'd like to do before we have the prayer, I'd actually like everybody to kind of go ahead and...
There's a good mix of entrepreneur students and some student leadership and a lot of business students, and then next year's student leadership are all here. The next year's student president was just voted in. He's here too. So kind of a good mix of business and leadership.
So people that you think that will be starting businesses, running organizations, and things like that.
Well, everyone in here is powerful.
Okay, so the hiring side. I'm just trying to look at how much time to spend on putting together an organization.
Let me go ahead and turn the time over.
Probably more on overview leadership skills and less on organization. But
yeah, I'll go quickly on it, but I'm just going to highlight that that it's important. Yeah, okay.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful for this day that we have the opportunity to come and listen to Brother Peterson speak and for his willingness to come and teach us. We're so grateful for this week and the exciting events it brings. Please help us this week that we may be able to take advantage of the opportunities that we are being given and be able to learn things from all the wonderful speakers and guests we are going to have. We say these things humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jordan. Again, thank you for all being here, and aloha.
Aloha.
This is a great opportunity for all of us. I'm looking forward to taking, hopefully, as many notes as many of you do, as we listen to Scott Peterson instruct us in key principles of leadership. My understanding is that he's actually taught this with many corporations. Sometimes it's been a longer workshop, maybe as long as 6 hours, and Scott has condensed it down to about 2-hour workshop. I believe he'll actually allow some questions and some answers during the course. We'll just ask Scott, if you do that, just repeat their questions for a recording, if you can do that. Let me introduce Scott. Scott is the managing director at BYU Provost Rollins Center at the Marriott School, the Rollins Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology. In other words, he's my counterpart, but many steps above at the program over there. We're really excited to have Scott and his wife here with us. He served on the board of directors for Health and Benefit Systems, one of the largest voluntary benefits company for large corporations and hospitals. And he is also an entrepreneur himself. He's done many things. One that I've always been intrigued with is APU Solutions. It's a marketing leader in salvage and alternative parts for the auto industry. Several other companies. You know what, I'm not going to share all of them, because what I'd really like us to do is focus our time on listening to Scott, learning from him, and key principles that we can use in our lives to become not only good leaders, but great leaders. So please join me in welcoming Scott Peterson.
It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. We always love coming to the islands, but we always love the people here. We love the students here at Brigham Young University, and it's a great opportunity to be here. One of the things that I can tell you about leadership right out of the gate is that it's difficult, and that it's a lifelong learning process. It's sort of like going to church every week. We go to church every week, and we are told the same things, or we think we're told the same things every week. Actually, if we're good stewards and we listen carefully to the Spirit, there are many things that are unique every single week. But the reason of the repetition is because of the difficulty in actually acquiring the habits and the attributes that we need in mortality to learn to become like our Father in heaven, who obviously is a very gifted leader. And I can tell you that just like in the church, where we understand the principles of the gospel, but we sometimes find them a little bit difficult to live, you can learn principles of leadership, and sometimes you can find that they are reasonably difficult to live. But we're going to talk about many of those today, and if you have questions during the middle of it, we can interrupt this at any time. There is a lot of information, and so I want to get to it as much as I can. So the very first thing out of the chute, I'm going to just play this little video here, clip, and we'll get your opinion.
I just thought Captain should have that for my name for consideration.
So what do you get out of that? Everybody has to know who's in charge. There's a great scripture that I love that says, if the trumps send an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle? Think of that. So many times you think that what we just witnessed here between these two captains is unique. I'm here to tell you it isn't true. It completely happens all the time. But it's very important that an organization understand its roots, its leadership, and that its leadership is respected. So what I'd like to actually do now is to break down the parts and pieces. And every organization has different parts and pieces. Whether it's the church or a business or a nonprofit, it doesn't matter. And if you ever think about nonprofits, they are many times poorly managed. They're not operated as soundly as a business. They should be, because the money that's involved, I consider it to be next to tithing, so they should be well run, but it just means the importance of leadership can never be overstated, and that it is a lifelong learning process. So I liken it to basketball. I know that we have a few basketball players or athletes around, but there are many parts and pieces that make up a successful basketball player. For example, they've got to be able to shoot, they've got to be able to shoot free throws, they've got to be able to pass, they've got to be able to dribble, they've got to be able to rebound, they've got to be able to play defense. And the unique thing about it, when you sit back and think about it, is that every one of those skills can be practiced in isolation. So I want you to think about that. Every one of those skills can be practiced in isolation. I remember hiring a college basketball player to teach my little 5-year-old, who's now 31, how to dribble the ball. Put him through drills, and I can tell you that regardless of someone's skill level, you can go through drills and you can learn how to be better. So that's what I like to think about in business when you think about general administration, operations, sales and sales management, marketing, branding, finance, technology, research and development, and so forth. Now, when you think about each one of those and you say, all right, well, what does that mean? So general administration, let's say that the phone rings, and the minute the phone picks up, what kind of experience does the customer have, right? Because the more effective an organization is from top to bottom in its execution, then the better chance that it has to survive. Because as we look in the scriptures and we learn about the law of the harvest, right? We reap what we sow. And also the law of the jungle. And the law of the jungle is the survival of the fittest, the law of natural selection. And it sounds kind of difficult, even mean-spirited, but in business it's actually good, because it's what allows for the competition, and it allows for people to buy things more competitively. So you want to cut all of the fat out of an organization, make it skinny, make it lean, make it efficient, and you do that by being able to practice each one of these things in isolation, and to have people in those spots who are experts. Because we'll get to some of those things later, but this is, to lead an organization, you have to understand the entire organization. So sometimes when you think, I can give you a good example. When I was about 25 years old, I was offered a position as the national sales manager for an orthopedic company. And you'd have thought that I would have raised my hand and said, pick me, I'm excited, this is a big paycheck. But actually, I evaluated the size of the job, what I really thought I understood about the job, and it actually took me a week of developing my own plan before I came back and said, you know, I think with a little bit of help and a whole lot of hard work that I can pull this off, and it actually turned out very well. But it takes an understanding of the parts and pieces. So I liken management and leadership sometimes to data. If you were trying to fly an airplane and you didn't have good data, then guess what? You wouldn't be flying an airplane. You'd be down on the ground in a wreck, in a heap. And so I like to call this data-driven leadership. Now, I just worked with a nonprofit recently, and we spent quite a bit of time together, maybe 4 or 5 months. I met with their senior leadership team every single week for that whole period of time. And we developed these types of metrics, key performance indicators. We looked at every single thing in the organization that said, if this is going well, then the organization's going well. But what's interesting, as long as they'd been in business as a foundation, they had never sat down to understand what it was that they should be measuring and why it was important and how they could actually then impact it if they isolated it, looked at it, decided what they were presently doing, and asking questions about their execution on those principles. All right, so if you look at green, yellow, and red performance metrics, that's what we instituted throughout. We said, all right, if we have the data, if we understand what data is important, then we're going to set zones so that we'll know if we're operating efficiently. We'll set our green zones, our yellow zones, and our red zones. Our green zones are everything is go, everything's great. If they're in the yellow, that's before we have a problem. Then we say, you know what, we need to get in here and take a good hard look and figure things out. And if it's red, it's like everyone should be scrambling and figure this out and changing things around. You got to get buy-in and from your associates and partners. One of the things about running an organization is you can't just ram your way through running the organization the way that you want to do it. You've got to get consensus. You've got to take it where it needs to go, but sometimes that it means involving lots of people who won't necessarily see eye to eye with you, and that's okay. Because you don't want everybody to see eye to eye with you, otherwise they're just clones of you, and that's a bad situation. You want to have disparate personalities and people and skill sets, and you sort of want to be fighting with each other a little bit, nicely, playing nice in the sandbox, but you definitely do want to have the opportunity to sort of mix it up and see which ideas can stand the test of scrutiny. All right, and then you can see, I would entertain, can anybody tell me where this comes from, training on return and report? Go ahead. Thank you. But you know what? I never hardly see it used the way it should be in the church, and I never hardly see it used the way it should be in business, even in larger companies that I've been in. For example, almost all the time, I'm the one that calls up the high priest group leader and says, I've got my home teaching done, let me tell you about my families and so forth. And if you think about what happens in the temple, this is important. Did the father trust?
Yes.
Okay. Was he ever let down? Did the Savior let him down?
No.
No, he never failed. Did the apostles let him down? No, never happened. So let me just ask you a question. When you're in the chain, in the value chain somewhere, do you break down? I want you to think about that. That, my friends, is leadership, not breaking down. Inspecting what you expect. And one of my favorite scriptures comes from Abraham 4:18 or 13, whichever one it is. And the gods watched those things which they had ordered until they obeyed. So I have a strong feeling, based on that and other things that I have read, that there is a great deal of oversight. Trust, but still oversight, to make sure that things run the way that they should run. So this is something that I've missed a couple of times in my career, and every time I've missed it, I've regretted it. An effective leader will plan before you act. You just think about that. Learn before you plan. And when things take an unexpected negative turn, you'll step back and learn more before letting one false word or one cross-eyed look spoil your chances for success. Now you think about that. I can tell you that one of the authors of the book that wrote this, he's human just like me too. So we all can feel a little bit comfortable that every once in a while, notwithstanding we know what we're doing, we'll falter. For example, this professor, a professor that I'm close friends with, had gotten permission to use some slides. The other professor whose slides there were didn't know it. And in front of the MBA class where the professor was teaching, as the transition between one class to the next came up and said, well, you know, you could at least get your own slides, and proceeded to say some stuff that wasn't very kind. Now, he understood this principle, but he found it difficult himself to live in that moment. And I have found myself in the same situation. So I am not the pot here calling the kettle black. I understand how difficult it is to always do these things. So Leadership, very quickly, defined as one's ability to be able to get others to want to follow you. And why would they follow you? Could you become, for example, the next Pied Piper? What is it? One of the things that I ask students is that I'll let them know that, and this may be later, but it's a good time to bring it up. Napoleon, his presence on the battlefield, the Duke of Wellington said it was worth 40,000 soldiers. And then I asked the question, what's yours? Think about it. When you walk in a room, do you make people stand up and notice? Think about it. I just want you to really think about the presence of a gifted leader and all of the attributes that we're going to talk about that go into it. So, can't spend a lot of time here, but integrity, humility, those are two great big ones. Dedication, being magnanimous and giving credit. This is hard for a lot of people, to give the credit to others. Give it away, and then when things are problematic, it's your fault. It's hard. It's really hard. But it's really necessary to inspire people. Openness, creativity, fairness, asserting, all these important ones. And then these, the 5 C's I call them. Compassion. Now, how many of you heard about Mitt Romney when Bob Gay, Elder Gay, his daughter, was in some difficulty and she went to New York? How many of you guys know about it? Raise your hand. Okay. For the rest of you, Mitt Romney shut down the company. He shut down the entire company. Now, I don't know if you know how much those guys make, but to shut down the company, to take all the executives, he flew them to New York from Boston. They set up a perimeter and a base camp, and they developed a strategic plan, Mitt did, and then they scoured the city of New York, finding her just in time. Before she would have been in serious difficulty. So that's compassion. So in an organization, things happen, and you have to be able to know those moments when it's time to really exercise that. But there are also difficult things, such as changing someone out. I remember being given the assignment by my senior business partner. He was the CEO, and I was the president of the company, and he gave me the assignment to terminate someone. And it was an unpleasant termination. And it wasn't even really one that I thought myself should take place. So what do? Those are moments of leadership. And because I had talked about this in detail with my partner, and he was the majority shareholder, I simply released her like a church calling. I thanked her for her service. I told her that she had done magnificent work, that we were changing directions inside of the organization, and it made it necessary for us to consider some other avenues. And I left it at that. I didn't make her feel bad. It was a difficult situation, but that's leadership. Competence. I can tell you that in organizations, this is one of the biggest pitfalls. If a leader isn't competent, if they aren't good at what they do, if they do not inspire confidence because of their capabilities, then they will have difficulty in having others follow them. So this is something, again, how do we become competent? We become lifelong learners. Are you paying attention in Sunday school this year, or priesthood? So, I guess it's priesthood, sorry. So tell me about the manual that we're learning in priesthood meeting. Who is it? Perfect. So what was he known as? A lifelong learner. He had a big library. You think about it. The glory of God is intelligence, and you'll probably not get it in front of television. And I can tell you that there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn out there. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, so I've started up 7 companies, co-founded or founded 7 companies. I've been involved in many others actually, but and so each one of them were very difficult. Each one of them took longer than I thought. They cost much more money than I thought. They were fraught with many more difficulties than I thought. And if I knew all the things that I would have had to go through in order to start those businesses at the outset, I never would have started them. But once you start them, then it's all about leadership and seeing it through till you're finished. And that's one thing that George Washington learned. That was one of the great lessons that he talked about often, was that he just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and the last person standing wins. And so if you don't quit, many times that is sufficient to succeed. But also in the process of that, I stopped the world, and I actually went to one of my great loves of researching writing, and so I wrote a book on the apostasy called Where Have All the Prophets Gone? Just completed a second book on early Christianity with a co-author. So the only reason for bringing that up is to say how important it is, and that I feel it is at least, to learn, and competence comes from that. Communication, I will tell you that in marriages, in organizations, in church, in business, that poor communication is the root of all evil. I promise you. Just if you haven't figured that out yet, you will. And the better communicator that you can become, the better leader that you'll become. And so I do always remember that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and there's a good reason for that. All right, and then commitment. As long as it's legal, moral, ethical, and not too fattening, whatever it takes. I don't care. Whatever it takes. When I think about my early success in sales, and I wasn't a professional technical sales guy, I was brand new, and yet in 5 months in a Fortune 1000 company in the division that I worked for, I was the top in the entire company. Entire company. Why? Because I found that people couldn't outwork me, and that they couldn't be more honest than I was, and I cared about people more than most. And those 3 traits overcame the fact that I wasn't a gifted yet technical sales guy. All right, so integrity. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but I am going to stop the world to point out to you the critical nature of integrity, and that we as a people in the church suffer from it sometimes. You may not think so, because sometimes the arrogance that we have as being members of the Lord's true church makes us think that because we go to church and because we take the sacrament that, you know, our integrity is great. But I have seen it too often in the business world where people are willing to sacrifice their integrity for a few dollars. I had to come back to the Salt Lake Valley where I grew up, from having spent 21 years in Overland Park, Kansas, to find out just how difficult it is to trust the people that you're serving. It's a tough deal. So I'm telling you, the rising generation, the critical nature of what it means to be and to have integrity. And I have walked away from millions of dollars, and my wife knows about them, almost one by one, rather than turn on integrity. So we could give these nice descriptions about it, and we compare the law of integrity to the law of gravity, and that if you kick against the pricks, so to speak, you're not going to win. And that if you don't have a parachute or an airplane or a hang glider or something, and you jump off a cliff, you know what's going to happen. And the same is true with integrity. Wonder if you all remember Enron, maybe you're a little too young, or WorldCom, or Tyco, or in 2007 and 8, Countrywide. But those are all entities that can tell you that they didn't get it right. They didn't get it right. It was issues of integrity that took them down. So, it's just about choices. I'd love to spend more time on it, but I hope that you all get the message that it's all about integrity. And one of the things that I love about George Washington is he couldn't be bought. And I could tell you lots of stories about him. I love the story of his life. So, vision is everything. What did we find in the scriptures about vision? It says that without vision, the people perish. All right, so we're going to go through. Hope our technology is good to us.
Vision doesn't come from me as a CEO. Sure, I have input into vision, but so does everybody else. It it's a shared vision among the leadership team. People will buy into something that they call creations. Now, when you're creating a vision, not a lot of startups have vision statements. And it's vital to keep alignment as you scale. Our vision statement's right up front as you walk in the building. And the vision statement can be anything you want. Where do you want to be in 2 years? Use your imagination. Paint a picture. Whatever that picture is, imagine it in as much detail as possible. Get group buy-in and, hey, here is where we can get as a leadership team. Once you have that buy-in, you build that vision, you write it down. Now you're going to figure out how do we reach that vision. It might seem bold at first, like, wow, that's a long way off. How do we do that? What you do is we have a process for coming up with different strategic imperatives. We have 6 strategic imperatives in our playbook, and every single person agrees. If we do all 6 of these strategic imperatives, then hey, we got to our vision. We did it. And the strategic imperatives are kind of high level, but lower level than the vision statement. And we take strategic objectives, and each strategic imperative is broken down into probably 3 or 4 strategic objectives. Everybody agrees that the strategic imperative is met once you've done the objectives. Last thing is you just do tasks. Each strategic objective has a set of tasks associated with it, with the owner, with the due date. At the end of the day, you have all the tasks necessary over the next 2 years. These are high-level tasks. This isn't a function of micromanagement. This is high-level stuff. And a leader owns the task with the due date. Now you have a self-managing system that gets you your vision. Every week in my weekly staff meeting, I need a 5-year-old to manage the business once you set this up, because it's red light, yellow light, green light on each task. So you know the executives you have that are just killing it. They're superstars, green light every single time. And you know the ones that aren't pulling their weight. And it's not just me, it's them, and it's all of their peers.
So, this was a lecture that this fellow gave at Stanford in 2007 and 8. I remember using these same principles back in 2000 running my company Planet Salvage, which became APU Solutions. So notice how he used data to drive the business. First of all, it was the vision, right? The vision was what carried the day. Every decision was filtered through the lens of the vision. So what is a vision? How do you describe the vision? The vision is, where are we going and who do we want to be when we grow up? And a mission is, why do we exist? Okay? Now, if organizations really say what they mean and mean what they say, then those statements become very powerful. But most companies just put them up there as platitudes, hang them up on a wall, and nobody else ever looks at them again. But every single decision, including the ones at BYU, and I developed this incredible dashboard that the deans were completely blown away by when they saw the dashboard, because we measure all of our statistics at the center, everything from all the classes, every student that we teach, all through the metrics of our vision. And so what's our vision? To be the global leader in successful campus-inspired entrepreneurial ventures. That's it. It's big and it's bold, and it got buy-in from all of the stakeholders. And so we're executing on it. And that's why we have so many businesses that are chunking out of BYU every single year. Because everything that we do revolves around that vision. And then our mission is a little bit different. I don't have time to delve deeper into that. But all right, so let's look again here at a visionary situation in practice.
Not exactly my motivation. Hostage pulses from was born when this city was lost. We fight over an offense we did not give, against those who were not alive to be offended. What is Jerusalem? Your holy places lie over the Jewish temple that the Romans pulled down. The Muslim places of worship lie over yours. Which is more holy? The wall? The mosque? The sepulchre? Who has claim? No one has claim. All have claim.
That is blasphemy. Be quiet.
We defend this city, not to protect these stones, but the people living within these walls.
So I think that you can see the clear difference between leadership in that situation with whatever his name is. I can't remember what his name is. Right, Orlando Bloom, and the bishop. Now I want you to think about the command that Orlando Bloom, albeit in a movie, demonstrated and the principles that he employed. He was at a crisis moment where the city of Jerusalem was about to be taken over in the First Crusade, and he mounted that offensive right there and saved the lives of all the people, or the majority of the people. So a real life example, not exactly like that, but clearly close to it. Back in 2000, I started a company called APU Solutions, Planet Salvage. So I had two partners from Ernst & Young. Goes back to integrity. I told them how difficult it would be to start a new business. I said I had no idea what kinds of things were going to occur, but that it would be difficult. That there would be times that would test everyone. That it would be something at certain points where we would say, why in the world did we do this? And we would look at how risky it was and say, really? Well, they were all in, And so on January 14th, we signed the papers. I put $500,000 of my own money. They each put 50. We decided not to be paid for 120 days while we got the company up and started, and then we rolled up our sleeves and went to work. Interestingly, about 2 weeks later, they came and said, "Scott, how come you haven't got the company funded yet?" And I said, "Well, we've been at it for 2 weeks. I have tons of contacts, and we've reached out, and we have a lot of interest, but it's only been 2 weeks. People don't make decisions this quickly." I said, "Well, we got to get it because we're going to run out of money." And interestingly, providentially, we signed a letter of intent on February 27th, just a month later. On the 13th of April 2000, we signed the definitive agreement. That's the same day that the tech market dropped 318 points and was the beginning of the end of the internet bubble. And guess what? We only got the first million. We didn't get the other 7 million that was committed. We'd already spent the first million, committed it to our technology. It was prior to the days of the lean startup. I learned a lot by that experience. But Marilyn and I were in Paris, France on our 20th wedding anniversary, and I get a phone call from my partner. And he said, "Scott, the group that funded us has called and said that they're not going to fund the other $7 million. But it gets worse." The two Ernst & Young guys, they went down to our payroll guy, and they took back their investment and all the money that they would have paid, and they took a ton of money out of the account. So do I sue? Really? Why? Why would I sue? Do you get money from anyone if you're in a lawsuit? No. Are you busy building a business when you're embroiled in a lawsuit? Where's your energies? Sometimes you just have to look on, look past it, move on. When we sold the company 12 years later, they weren't a part of that big exit. They should have waited. But they got impatient and they didn't, and they missed the reward. They also missed the most important thing. They missed all the lessons. They missed lessons that were so amazing that I wouldn't trade them for any amount of money. Because at the end of the day, the lessons are what created and put a big stamp on my own character. Why would I trade it for money? Money doesn't bring me salvation. But I can tell you that what we learn will help us in that process. So here's another instance before we get to another video here. Jack Welch. Good business leaders create a vision, they articulate the vision, they passionately own the vision, and they relentlessly drive it to completion. The other important traits, we talked about the Duke of Wellington, and here is another video that I really like that shows how a real leader, whoops.
I'm the one who's rotting. I think your face is greater than mine. You saved your family, increased your land. In time, you will have all the power in Scotland.
Lands, titles, men, power, nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. When fight for me, because if they do not, I throw them off my land and I starve their wives and their children.
Those men who bled the ground red at Falkirk, they fought for William Wallace, and he fights for something that I've never had. And I took it from him when I betrayed him, and I saw it in his face on the battlefield. And it's tearing me apart. All men betray. All lose heart. I don't want to lose heart. I want to believe as he does. I'll never be on the wrong side again.
So, what were the distinctions between the two leaders? It's all right. You can speak.
One didn't care about people.
Okay, one didn't care about the people. In fact, he said, the only way that I've been able to lead is I starve them. I tell them that if they don't do what I want them to do, I'm not going to feed them, I'm going to kick them off my lands, and I'm going to starve their children. What kind of motivation is that? On the other hand, because of the vision of William Wallace, who reminds us in this situation of Captain Moroni, who said that he fought, as he hoisted the title of liberty, that they had a better cause. That they were fighting for their families, they were fighting for their way of life, for their very freedoms, for their religion, and everything that they held dear. That's what they were fighting for, and frankly, it is the same thing that William Wallace was fighting for, but on the other hand, the only way that this other fellow exuded leadership was by kicking people off of his land. That's how he got them to do what he wants. So you see the contrast of what great leaders are able to do. All right, so genuine people skills. So when we think about people skills, the ability to treat people as they should be treated, as human beings, as equals. That there isn't a hierarchy where a leader is superior to his subordinates, associates. He's not superior. That's why humility becomes such a great trait. The bishop is not better than his flock, and nor is the stake president, and frankly, nor are the apostles. And the interesting thing is, the apostles, most stake presidents, most bishops, they get that. They serve at the pleasure and will of the Lord. They are not better. They are chosen. But they are not necessarily always better. And leaders inside of organizations clearly are not better. But many times they make themselves out to be better. One of the things that I really liked in one of our organizations is that we recognized this and we eliminated preferential parking spots. And we eliminated a lot of other practices inside of the company that would create classes and distinctions. There's a question.
Yes. What sort of, on what scale are we talking about better? Because I think it's natural that the leader is better at something, decision making. And that's what the leader, we talk about competence and other things. Or are you just talking on quality?
Okay, good question. The question is, you know, isn't a leader, you know, necessarily better at certain things than others? That may be very true. Maybe they have more skill, more knowledge, more this or more that in a particular space. But let me bring it down to a different level and have you pause and think about it. Why do they have that gift? Who gave it to them?
God.
Okay, so how do you know that that other person sitting there who isn't the leader was simply given less gifts for the sake of mortalities, trials, and tribulations? I don't know. I simply know that the Lord said not to judge. And I've had experiences thinking about that at great depth. So just because somebody has more skill doesn't make them better, even if they've attained a higher level of obedience. Who is good?
So we're talking about value in God's eyes and how we should treat each other.
I think that's a good measure. But I think that most leaders, even outside of the church, who are gifted leaders, would tell you that they are more effective when they treat their people as equals, even if they have superior gifts. So I think it's more about how people are treated and how they're valued that matters. Now, one of these that's really important is decision making. Right, wrong, whatever the heck, make a decision. So, I'm going to tell an experience with my lovely wife here where if she has one weakness, it's probably the only one that I know of, she really doesn't like to make decisions sometimes. And so we joke about this, and we were planning a trip to Europe for a couple weeks, and so the tickets are kind of expensive, and you know, pulling the trigger means that, okay, all right, that means you've spent the money, and if you make a mistake, you know that you're going to have to spend more money to fix it. And Marilyn, she is definitely one of my friends called Mormons Christian Jews. That if you you know, drive an automobile, that it stops on a dime and picks it up too. So, at any rate, here we are, it's midnight, we're tired, you know, it's ready to push the button. She says, well, let's just do it tomorrow. And I said, no, honey, we have got all the information. We have all the information. We've looked at all the websites, we have all the information, and now it's decision time. And right, wrong, or in the middle, we're going to make a decision, and we're going to pull the trigger and push the button. So we pushed the button, and Marilyn said, man, I'm just feeling about going to sleep tonight. You know, I said, don't worry, it'll be okay. It'll be all right. And so she gets up the next morning and she finds out that the ticket to Prague has just doubled in price, and that if we hadn't pulled the trigger, that we would have ended up paying more money. You know, you don't always make the right decision, but leaders have to make great decisions. And if I had time, I would have showed you another video clip from U571 where he talks about the captain having to make decisions. So, it's important. All right, planning and strategy is another critically important trait of a leader, right? You got to be able to know where you're going to take the organization, and it's all about strategy and planning. So we're going to talk about some of those. We develop an effective annual strategic business plan. This is for an operating business or an operating organization. It encapsulates and remains true to a clear understanding of the vision and mission statements, right? So anything that we did inside of our business plan necessarily feeds right into the vision and mission. It can't, they're one and the same. We have to go through a thorough SWOT analysis. How many of you guys know what a SWOT analysis is? Anybody not know what it is? Raise your hand if you don't. Okay, a SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis means that we're going to evaluate our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats. So think about it. How can you plan? Let's look at what is the fifth point of a compass? We all know about north, south, east, and west. What is the fifth point of a compass?
Alignment? North?
Good answer, but not the one I'm looking for.
True north.
Not the one I'm looking for.
Center.
Direction.
Where are you now? Does it really matter about north, south, east, and west if you do not know where you are right now? In relationship with where you want to go. Remember Alice in Wonderland. Okay? Now, I think it's really important here to think about this. When you look at where you're at right now and you say, what are my strengths as an organization or as an individual? What are my weaknesses? You should be pretty good at that. You know, what is it? Know thyself? Did Shakespeare say that? Right? You college students, know thyself. Know your weaknesses so that you have the ability to be able to establish plans for defeating your weaknesses. Did you know how difficult it is to really change, how hardwired our brains really are scientifically, the neuroscience behind how our brains are actually wired? We wire them according to our actions, according to our beliefs, according to our thinking. No wonder the scriptures state that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. But they didn't have the science behind that then. But God did. And we have the science behind it now. And if you want to know why pornography is so darn hard to defeat, it's because you wired it into your brain. You put a hard wire there. It's not a soft wire, it's a hard wire. It's the same thing with all of the other habits, good or bad, that we have. They become hardwired. And so the changing is difficult. I spoke to a friend of mine who is a psychologist, and he said, Scott, I really don't like people to know this, but if all of us psychologists had to make a living based on real change in behavior, we'd all be bankrupt. That's how hard it is to change. Even motivated people, and I consider myself to be highly motivated, have a hard time changing and going from good to great. That's why becoming like God is a lifelong process, and SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, become very helpful in allowing us to put together a plan. And then we move on to identifying critical bottlenecks inside of an organization. You ask yourself, what's holding us back? Why are we not progressing? And then you think about it and you brainstorm with your team, and if you've got a good team, you're going to come up with lots of things. And then you develop priorities. Remember what we talked about in vision, where we have our vision and our strategic imperatives, and then we have our strategic initiatives, and then we have our tasks that go underneath them, and that by accomplishing those, and they're all quantified. It's nothing that, you know, we have to scratch our heads. We wrote it down. We know what it is. We can act on it. We can change it. And that's what happens when we're developing strategic plans. And then we develop 3 or 4 of these key strategic initiatives, department level strategies, tactical plans. We have the task and plan owners. And we're at a great point here. I want you to really pay attention to this.
We can't hold the instruct. We know that. So if you don't, they go on high, over the hill, and we'll find Peterson. Sir, here they come. Get them away. If you stay there, we can't shoot. So let's fix bayonets. Let the advantage move downhill. They gotta be tied to the rest. They gotta be close to the end of the wheel. So fix bayonets. Ellis, wait, Ellis, you take the left wing, I'll take the right. I want a right wheel forward of the whole regiment. When you charge? Yes, but here's what we do. We're going to charge swinging down the hill. Just like we pull back the left side of the regiment, now we're going to swing down. We swing like a dog. We're going to sweep them down the hill so they come up. Understand? Does everybody understand? Yes. Okay, Ellis, you take the left wing. When I give the command, I want the whole regiment to go forward, swinging down to the left. Right, sir. Move. this man continue. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
This is one of the most touching scenes in all of American history. Now I want you to think about what might have happened if he did not hold the hill at the Battle of Little Round Top, as it's known, at Gettysburg. This was the last chance that they had to keep the Confederate armies from storming that hill, or swarming in around, outflanking them and overtaking the entire army. In fact, so important was the outcome of this battle that it would have placed, they would have most likely lost the battle at Gettysburg, and if they lose the battle at Gettysburg, then what is the outcome of the Civil War? How long does slavery endure if we don't win the Civil War? What would our country look like today? How important is leadership? How important is it for vision? He understood that that hill at all costs had to be maintained. And you find that in organizations that those kinds of opportunities present themselves all the time. Are you going to take that hill? Are you going to be able to accomplish and get done what needs to be done? I know a lot of people who are anxious to do that in business and less anxious to do that in their church callings, and not as diligent in their own families. I just want you to think about that. I want it to penetrate your soul. Leadership and vision is so important. And the planning and strategy that goes into it, and as you watched him bark out the orders, it was clear that he knew what he was doing, he knew how to direct, and the people trusted him. And in fact, at the end of it, remember what the individual said to him? He said, "It's been a pleasure serving you. Working with you has been the best thing that ever happened in my military career." Okay, so that way, for that reason, in business and in organizations and in the church and in families, we should have accountability sessions. Those are called PPIs in the church, right? Or visiting teacher, Marilyn, what are they called in visiting teaching? Where you sit down and visiting teaching review. I can't remember what you call them. Same thing. So inside of those accountability sessions, you've got content, you've got frequency, style, outcomes, and recording decisions so that you can go back to those. What if you have a great priesthood interview? What if you have a great meeting with a subordinate and you talk about, you have great content that has been put together, you're meeting frequently, your style is such that people enjoy the conversation working with you, they know that you're on the same team, and you know also that outcomes were always expected, and you record those so that you make sure that nobody forgets what the content of the conversation really was, so that in future meetings you can have that. All right, and then we get into another problem, is how do you solve problems?
You're telling me you can only give our guys 45 hours? That brings them to about there. Gentlemen, that's not acceptable.
Power is everything. Without it, they don't talk to us, they don't correct their trajectory, they don't turn the heat shield around. We gotta turn everything off. Now. They're not gonna make it to re-enter.
What do you mean everything?
With everything on, the one draws 60 amps. At that rate, 16 hours, batteries are dead, not 45. And so's the crew. We gotta get them down to 12 amps. You can't run a vacuum cleaner on 12 amps, John. You gotta turn off the radars, cabin heater, instrument displays, the guidance computer, the whole smack.
Well, guidance computer, what if they need to do another burn? Gee, they won't know which way they're pointing.
The more times we talk down here, the more juice they waste up there. I'm looking at the data for the past hour.
That's the deal.
That's the deal.
Okay, John. And we finish this iron, we'll power down the line. Now, in the meantime, we're going to have a frozen command module up there. In a couple days, we're going to have to power it up using nothing but the re-entry graphics. We've been tried before. No, we've never even simulated it before, Gene. Well, we're going to have to figure it out. I want people in our simulators or re-entry scenarios. I want you guys to find every engineer beside every switch, every circuit, every transistor, every light bulb that's up there. Then I want you to talk about the assembly line who actually built the thing. Find out how to squeeze every amp out of both of these machines. I want this marked all the way back to Earth with time spare. We never lost an American in space. We're sure it's not going to lose one on my watch. Failure is not an option.
What did you notice? What did you notice?
He had to make a decision.
He had to make a decision. What else did you notice?
He trusted his people.
He trusted. And he had what? He had competent employees.
I was going to say he trusted someone he might not have known how much intelligence that guy actually had, but he said he trusted.
He probably did, actually. Being the leader, I'm just assuming, something because of my own situations. You have to know your staff members, right? And so and you pick your staff members, and in critical situations like that, if you didn't have people that you could trust, and he did trust his people. And he used his people very well in that scenario. That was a great exercise in watching a leader stand up as the general, not overrun his people, listen to his people, engage his people, and come up with specific concrete directions. So being a leader is not so easy, and it happens by starting at the ground. Inside of an organization, I remember first learning about sales and sales management and putting a mark in the sand, so to speak, in that area. And then about operations and supply chain. And then about accounting and finance. And so on and so forth until it got to the point where after a lot of bad experiences, because that's how wisdom usually comes. For example, in starting one of my businesses, while I was putting money into the business, I had my Relief Society president bookkeeper taking money out the other side at the same time. And so, you learn about segregation of duties, and you learn about trusting, and you learn about all the different things that go into it, so that when you get in this moment in time and you're the general, that you've been there. And you understand it, and you give yourself those experiences, and then you bring people into that can help you. So we'll run out of time, but I want you to look at this really carefully here. The problem-solving model. We identify the problem, we collect the data, and we analyze the problem. We ask ourselves, where are we, as opposed to where do we want to be, and we generate and evaluate potential solutions. We get buy-in from our team, we select the plan and plan the solution, we test, implement, and standardize, and a lot of people miss that part. We test, we implement, and then we standardize. I can tell you that operations fail because they're not standardized. That's why we have checklists. That's why we have processes, systems, procedures, because we're human beings. And if we're going to repeat something, that's why they call them best practices. We select a best practice, and it can be something that's moving target. For example, today it's the best practice. But what happens if inside the organization we're creating an innovative environment and somebody comes up with a better way? Well, great, now we can test it. We can evaluate it in one of our locations. Then we can try it in one of our districts. Then we can try it in a division. Then we can implement it company-wide if it passes all those tests. And then we revise and we pivot as necessary. Now here is the outcome of another one of those problem-solving situations from the same movie.
We have a situation brewing with carbon dioxide. CO2 filter problem. 5 filters on the limb. We can meet for 2 guys for a day and a half.
I told that they're already up to 8 on the inches. Anything over 15, you get hair judgment blackouts at the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
The structure on the limb module.
It takes what cartridges ones on the limb around.
The guys from upstairs handed us this one, and we got to come through for them. Now, they knew that they had their brothers on the line. Their lives were in their hands. Now, a lot of times we think that we don't have somebody else's life in our own hands as a leader. But I'm here to tell you that every day in leadership you have people's lives in your hands. And the outcomes many times are worse than the physical outcomes of people dying. Because of people dying, people simply dying doesn't mean that their soul is destined to some place that it wouldn't want to be. But if we don't intervene as leaders, for example, in the home or in the church, in the right ways, in scouting organizations, in others, then people's lives are at stake. When I think of leadership of a young man or a young woman, I think of all the parties that have to falter before someone is finally lost. Now you think about this for just a minute. You let it ruminate in your mind. We have bishops that have stewardship over every young man and every young woman. We have counselors and bishoprics. We have Relief Society presidents and primary presidents and young women presidents. We have home teachers and visiting teachers and Sunday school teachers. We have this robust organization, and every one of them caring individually, willing to do this up here, where they say, gentlemen, we have this, and it's got to fit into this, and we have nothing but this. And if leaders really said to themselves, we've got this young man or young woman over here, or we've got this problem in business, or we've got this problem wherever, and we've got this, and we've got this, and we've got to do this with nothing but this. And we just say, failure is not an option. Now I want you to think about that and ask yourself if you are prepared to lead. Some people want to lead. But are you prepared to lead? And will you prepare yourself? You know, for you young people here, you are the rising generation. The people that the whole world depends upon. And particularly in this group, the salt of the earth, that will be able to go out and do the kind of good in your homelands and wherever you end up to be able to change the course of history. Just think about it. Problem solving, it's a big issue. All right, so like that little Rubik's Cube. All right, so how do we do this then? How do we lead? So the right team plus teamwork equals the ultimate competitive advantage. It isn't who has the greatest technology or who has the greatest this or that or whatever else. Teamwork is the ultimate competitive advantage. And so, as our good friend Jim Collins said, we want to get first the right people on the bus, second the wrong people off the bus, and third, we want to get them in the right seats, and only then are we going to try to figure out where in the world to drive this thing. So I hope that you all remember that about leadership. It's getting people on the bus that are the right people, getting them in the right seats, and then determine where you want the bus to go. Question?
Does the potential that people on the bus have to do with the net or where you're driving to?
Say that louder.
I'm trying to figure out why you choose your personnel before you decide goals.
Well, because certainly you're going to have in mind certain goals, you know, about the kinds of people, because you know what kind of a business that you are already. So I think that a lot of that becomes intuitive in terms of when you become the CEO of a company, you already know the parts and pieces and so that need to fill out the organization. But until you get to know people, you don't know if they're the right people. And that's why the thing that we're going to talk about here next will really delve into that, I think, a little bit more. So good companies manage the expected, but great companies learn how to manage the unexpected. Great leaders manage expected things well, but what happens when you're thrown a curve? And believe me, sometimes you're thrown a curve, as I said at the beginning, and you don't respond perfectly. That's because of humanity. So I'm going to just whip through these very quickly, all right? But it's important that you at least get it. So stop the world, wake up with whatever you're doing, and you really need to think about what's going on here, because I don't have time to go through this in detail. But notice here in the process of recruiting, hiring, training, and retaining, you think that this is a funny little cartoon, but I'm telling you, I've hired tens of thousands of people, and it's true. Okay, so you got to have a formal recruiting process, a formal interviewing process, a formal hiring process, a formal training system, a formal management system, and only then will you have an organization that you can depend upon. Now, I like to liken this to Joseph Smith's first experience with the angel Moroni. So, the angel Moroni comes 4 times in the period of a single night and early morning and tells Joseph the exact same thing. So when I'm in an organization and I have, first of all, a recruiting process that helps me scour the planet to get A players. And second of all, once I've scoured the planet to get my A players, I'm going to have a formal interviewing process. And this is the first time that the angel Moroni comes to visit. And he delivers the message to Garcia. Ever heard that before? How many know what it means to get the message to Garcia? All right. I've been using this for 30 years, and I can tell you it's one of the great training tools that I consider in all of my tool bag. And back in the turn of the century, 1899, 1900, 1901, during the Spanish-American War, William McKinley's President of the United States. And General Calixto Garcia is the head of the insurgency allied with the Americans against Spain. And he has an urgent letter that he needs to get to General Garcia. Now it's 1900 and we have primitive communication systems, we have poor road and infrastructure, and we got a short period of time that we got to get this daggum message all the way from Washington, D.C. down to Cuba, somewhere in the mountains of Cuba, to this guy. And how many of you would be saying, what? What are we talking about? How? Are you kidding me? Are we going to do that? And so his aides say, well, there's this guy, his name's Colonel Rowan, and he's a very resourceful guy. If anyone can do it, Colonel Rowan can do it. So they bring in Colonel Rowan, they give him the instructions, he puts him in an oilskin pouch, he slaps it in his, to his back, and in 3 weeks he has traversed the United States, crossed the Caribbean, gotten to Cuba, gotten through the mountains of Cuba, found General Garcia, delivered the message. It's the best government operation I have ever heard of. And he's back reporting to William McKinley that I got it done. Now, you know what? I tell that story to my young lieutenants and say, that's all I need to say. I'll never have to say anything else. I'll just have to tell you to get the message to Garcia. Don't disappoint me. You think about it. After you've heard that kind of a story and you understood, he didn't ask for any help. He didn't say, loan me a jet, loan me, 20 mules, or give me a, run a straight, he just got it done. He just got it done. He didn't make any excuses. He just got it done. So when we have the hiring system, they get told the same thing. They've been interviewed. They've been told what's expected in the interview system. They've been told when they got hired. Now, you remember what you promised in the interview? Yeah. And then when they're trained, oh, by the way, you remember what happened when we interviewed you and when we hired you? And now when we train you, we're telling you the same thing. And, oh, by the way, now when we have this management program, it's designed to do the exact same thing. That, by the way, this is what you have to do. This is what's expected. It's clear. And so on and so forth. Okay. Recruiting process. Again, I don't have time to go through this. Interviewing process. Oh, notice the Vegas sign up here? We have a process because we're not gamblers. Just in case you didn't know. Somebody says, we need to hire that guy, and you look at the resume and they say, well, look at that. Look at all those check marks in that resume. It's pretty terrible in there. And say, yeah, but there's something about that guy or that girl. You know, we got to hire that person. And you say, really? Are we at Vegas? Are we gambling? Why not look at the past as a perfect indicator, predictor of the future? Now, does that mean that people can't change and that they can't repent? That's what we learn in the church? Of course. But how long does it take to earn trust? That's a different story, guys. That's a different story. So when you make decisions in your life and in your careers, I hope you think about this long and hard. Marion Hanks always used to teach the principle that if you pick up this end of the stick, you get everything else that goes with the other end of the stick, including all of the unintended consequences. Now you think about that. I promise you, there are lots of unintended consequences attached to those decisions that you want to do instead of what you should do. So think long and hard. If you're looking at becoming a great leader, remember that. So the hiring process, wish we had time, training process. And then we get to this place that we call, it's one of my favorite books, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I love this book. I have used it so many times in my organizations to train our leadership team about what it means to be a team. And so look at the bottom and see if this doesn't work in building your family, in your church calling. See if it doesn't work in your business, in your nonprofit, or whatever organization. See if it doesn't work. If there is an absence of trust, how far will the team go? Nowhere. That's why it's at the bottom and it's the foundation. Well, what about this thing, fear of conflict? I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt your feelings, so I'm not going to say something that I should say to you. Now, I don't have to be mean. I don't have to be my 4-year-old daughter, or 3-year-old, or however old she was, Marilyn, when she said to the lady, "You're fat." You don't got to do that. But you've got to tell the truth. And you've got to be able to have reasonable conflict inside of an organization in order for it to be effective. So these organizations that all the time they're just saluting, that's not a good organization. We'll talk about that in a little minute. Or what about a lack of commitment that individuals have? If you have a job responsibility and you have a hill to take, can you be counted on to get the job done, to get the message to Garcia? Is there a lack of commitment? Or avoidance of accountability? Oh, I don't want to be held to account. People have their agency, and so I can't be responsible for them. Really? Leaders inspire people to do things they wouldn't ordinarily do because they create that trust, they allow for conflict, and they encourage conflict, the right kind, they obtain commitment, and they have great attention to results then. And same thing with effective meetings. How many boring meetings have you been to? I'm sure I've conducted some. I'm sure of it. But it's something that I'm constantly working on improving. If we can just turn around everything we know about meetings upside down, replace agendas and decorum with passion and conflict, we can transform drudgery into meaningful competitive advantage. And so in this great book, he talks about daily huddles and weekly tacticals and monthly strategics and quarterly offsites that allow the team to mesh and accomplish important things. Now, this is one of the clearly important things about leadership, and it's communication. And it's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in life and mortality, is communicate. I promise you. So I want you to think about how it is to listen, and we'll run through some of these slides a little bit. So you're talking to your spouse, especially if it's the woman speaking to the husband, and the husband is thinking about several different things, and the woman is speaking, but the husband isn't really listening. So, ever experienced that? Because I guarantee you that my wife has. And I try to always tell Marilyn, make sure, that you grab my chin, look me in the eye and say, honey, are you listening? Do you have this? Because so that I'm not distracted with something else, right, babe? Otherwise, is she really communicating? And likewise, am I communicating? If I simply just speak to somebody, do they really understand what it is that I'm trying to get out of them or get done? And I'm telling you the answer is no. And let me give you a realistic understanding of why that's the case. First of all, everyone was born in a different place. A lot of you might have been born in different countries, with different cultures, with different parents, with different religions, in different provinces, who went to different universities, who had different friends, whatever. Everyone views the world through their own lens. So the person that you're communicating with has this way of translating the world, and it's completely different from yours. And you think because you're speaking words that they get it, and they don't get it. Until you really stop the world and you got eye contact and you've got empathic listening going on, and you're stopping and asking a few questions along the way, and then real communication. And if it needs to be boiled down to writing and recorded and about 10 other processes, it's probably worth it to make sure that there isn't any miscommunication. So will you remember that in organizations, that great leaders, they communicate. And by the way, I'm not trying to trump the good book or anything like that, the scriptures, but there's the golden rule. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm probably coming up a little bit too soon. All right, so Robert Frost, he says, half the world's comprised of people who have something to say and can't, the other half who have nothing to say and keep on saying it. Is that true or true? Okay. The greatest problem in communication is the illusion that it's been accomplished. It's just an illusion. Nothing is so simple that it cannot be misunderstood. Some principles, don't sugarcoat it. Face-to-face, listening skills, what communication quadrant do they come from? So here's the one. Now I'll really embarrass myself, Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders, don't upset us. All we ask is that you let us have it your way. Where'd that come from?
They're young.
Burger King? All right. So what is the message there? It is that the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Oh, I just thought that we said we're all different. So I call the platinum rule, do unto others as they want it done to them. So will you itch my back right there? That's where it itches. Will you scratch that itch right there? So think about that when you're communicating with people, and look at those personality quadrants that you come from, whether it's red, blue, yellow, or white, or whether it's Briggs-Meyer or whatever else that it is. Think about where you come from, and if you don't understand this, I can't teach it here, but you should learn about it. So we've talked about listening. And I don't have time to stand up more, but here's a really important one. I've had trouble with this before. This is why I'm putting it here in the presentation. So you're seeing some of my own weaknesses come out here. When you are listening, are you ever defensive? I am. And it shows. And people can tell. So, really? That's what's coming across sometimes when I try to listen in the wrong way. So, having the eyebrows down makes everyone feel that you're closed and defensive and you should be open. Leaders are fair and they reward great work. I can tell you that Utah is well known as being the cheapskate capital of the world. It is. Ask any of I know these product managers and I know what they've said. I've worked in these Fortune 1000 companies, and so leaders involve and engage their people. All right, let's see if we can get this one to work. did you notice there? How he involved those young students so that they could learn and have a lesson about their whole lives that if they really picked up on. Why are we watching TV? Why are we playing video games? Why are we doing all these other things? Really? For what good reason? Leaders? Followers maybe, but leaders? So, seize the day. All right. Leaders are not always right. And they're humble about it. And I wish I could tell you the number of times that I've been wrong. And I hope that I've been able to say it, that I was wrong. 3 laws of leadership, like the 10 Commandments. Not everyone loves you. Welcome to the world. People push themselves. It's a respect that you need to show people. And it's part of picking the right people. Those people, the right people, will push themselves. You realize that if you're not a 10 or striving to be a 10, how will you hire a 10? If you're a 7, how will you hire a 10? Think about it. I learned this so long ago as a young sales manager, 23 years old, managing everyone that was older than me. And when I'd go to ride with another sales manager, and this was by the time I was a division manager, so I was probably 24, and I was riding with a sales manager and one of his people, and at the end of the day, I said to the sales manager, so tell me, how did we do today? What do you think about this guy? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rank his presentations? And the guy said, well, I thought they were pretty good. Maybe 7 plus, something like that. And you know what I was saying? I could have cried, actually, because I thought they were 3 or a 4. The law of diminishing returns. If I have a sales manager that thinks that a guy is doing a job of a 7 when it's actually a 4, where's the disconnect? First with me. I got to fix myself, and I got to fix my training, and I got to fix my expectations. 10s. To hire 10s, you got to be a 10. But remember, then people push themselves. And people on pedestals, they make easy targets, so try to stay off the pedestal. I'm going to show you a couple of those that are sort of funny. So, not everybody loves you. First of all, the country's 50-50. How do you like that? 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. I know a lot of good Democrats, good friends. I don't understand their whole philosophy, and guess what? They don't understand mine, and that's just the way it goes. Aristotle's golden mean. This is where a good liberal arts education will do you some good. I love philosophy, and I love history, and I love the ability to look backwards so that I can see ahead forwards. And think of it, Aristotle, his golden mean was basically that wickedness was on the ends, and that truth could be found somewhere in the middle. And I don't know if he was referring necessarily to simply truth or workable solutions. Because a united lesser decision, remember this, is better than a divided better decision. Just remember that. All right. Being well liked and respected is good, but not loved. So in organizations, we often have what we call the love group, the swing group, and the hate group. So 80% of the work is performed by 20% of the labor force. Did you realize that? That works all the time, the 80-20 rule. A difficult thing. So affecting change means hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds, then we remember this, that we loved him because he loved us first. What a wonderful, pure principle of leadership. Now, what does it mean to love somebody? Just to be clear about this. A friend of mine that many of you know, Stephen Covey, passed away recently. And And in his great book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he mentions this situation where a friend of his comes and says, Stephen, I got a problem. I've fallen out of love with my wife. What do I do? I want to leave her. I'm going to get divorced. What should I do? Love her. Should love her. Well, in your vernacular, dude, I told you that I didn't love her anymore. So what do I do? And he said, love her. And he did the same thing a third time. And finally he said, Steve said, love, my friend, is a verb. It means to work. It means to serve. It means to this. It means to that. And when you work and you serve and you do this and you do that, then love, the feeling, will return, he said. And so, isn't that true also of people that we serve in business, in organizations, in the church, and in our families? That when they know that we love them because we serve them, you know, that makes for a pretty good relationship, and you're going to get pretty far. The role of a servant. Most people push themselves. I liken this to the law of the scout camp. My wife will attest that as an active individual, I love still to work out and to stay fit, and when I go hiking, I like to race up the mountain. And Marilyn is going like this, yeah, and I really don't. But in organizations, you can't race to the top. You got to get the whole company there. And this is like getting scouts up to the top. You just have to wait. And switchbacks are a great place to stop and rest and to say, hey guys, look what we've done. Look how far we've come. Look how beautiful it is. Look at the results that we've obtained. Isn't it awesome? Gordon B. Hinckley was a master at that. And then we get our breath and we get a drink of water and we go to the next switchback and we do that and we get everybody to the top of the mountain, and that's leadership. Getting everybody to the top of the mountain. So people on pedestals make easy targets. Try this one on for size. You know, he didn't get up there by himself. He doesn't belong there. He doesn't know what to do there while he's up there. He's elevated beyond his ability to function. You just wonder what kind of dummy put him up there to begin with. Well, you really don't want to put yourself in that spot. A couple of examples. I can't show you this video clip because I got to skip some, but here's a goalie that was doing back handsprings and somersaults, you know, on a I'm not a big soccer, but what's it called? Yeah, okay. Anyway, on a free kick. Anyway, it's for winning the game. And so then he prepares to kick, and this guy actually kicks, and he kicks it in, gets the goal, and then he starts doing the backhands and somersaults and shoving it right back up his tailpipe. Okay. So, okay. All right, here is an important practice for you when you're trying to figure out how to help somebody. And that's what leaders do. I know we're all tired here, and if you give me 8 minutes, we're going to finish this up. And if I go 2 minutes over, I want to read from this book, and I hope you'll forgive me. It'll be well worth it. We started late. They said I could have 2 hours, but I'll try to do it in 1 hour and 55. Okay, so have you ever been to the doctor and you walk through the doors and you get in, you sit down with the doctor, and the doctor says, congratulations, you got yourself pneumonia. Or said, you've got yourself type 1 diabetes, or you've got, you know, whatever. I don't think so. When I go to the doctor, and I get an annual physical every year, I go in, the very first thing they do is they weigh me. And then they take me into a room and they take my blood pressure and they test my pulse to see how much I'm working out. And then the doctor comes in and he has a bunch of questions that he asks me. Then he looks at my tongue and he looks in my ear and a few other things, and he says, this is what you've got. Isn't that a great model for how to solve a problem in the workplace or any other organization? You just think about that. It'll be a great tool for you. All right, so couldn't find anything wrong. Maybe it was just lazy, okay. So the root of the problem. We first understand why. So here's 7 things that you might look at. When somebody says, well, I didn't know, I forgot, I didn't understand, I misunderstood, it didn't apply to me, I lacked the ability, I disagreed with you. That's why we didn't get the job done. So, any wonder why they didn't know? Any wonder why they forgot they had to tie a boat and they forgot to wipe or I don't know, forgetting? Okay. They didn't understand. Really? They misunderstood. It didn't apply to them. They lacked ability. That happens really, actually. I disagree with you. I've heard that before. Oh, I love that one, actually. All right, and so it's important that we learn how to present a problem, how to set up the problem, how to get buy-in, and then to present solutions and to work forward from that. So here's a process that happens a lot of times in business. I've sometimes done it. I can only think of a couple times, 2 or 3, I hope. I hope I haven't done it very much more. But, you know, what happens is you're so irritated that you stomp on the person who's getting this bad behavior, and then you berate them to let them know how much they stink, and then you bleed the person dry of all of their confidence and motivation. They should be seeing a lion when in fact they're a pussycat, because that's what you've turned them into. So this is what Isaac Newton, when he said, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So a better process is to stop, think, and lead. Again, because of time, I can't go into too much depth, and I want to be able to read this, this last thing. But I think just by thinking about this process, just remember, when you get into a difficult scenario, just stop the world, take several deep breaths, think, and if you have to, just leave and come back. It works with children, and it works with problems inside of an organization. And then once you've developed a well-crafted, thoughtful, appropriate, that doesn't destroy someone, then that's the way to go forward. So a friend of mine, he was going scuba diving with his wife, and she didn't know it, but she kicked off his mask. Now, if he didn't do what he should have done, which is to stop, think, and lead, he would have died. But he did what he was trained to do. He stopped, and he thought, and he properly reapplied, didn't panic, didn't, you know, I mean, imagine that you're down there, you can't see very well, and you've just had your mask kicked off, and that's your breathing device. His wife didn't have any idea, didn't know until they got to the top. So you stop, think, and then breathe. And it's the same thing with children or organizations. Stop, think, and lead. So I'd like to play this, but I don't have time, and so I won't. But this is a picture of Max Hall going off on the University of Utah, just beating them like a rented mule. And it was embarrassing, actually, how he did it. And what happened was the next time, oh, maybe it's not going to work now. Maybe that's telling me that I'm over. So there's a picture there of Riley Stevenson. And this time, when we missed the field goal, he's down on the ground, and he's putting his hand just like this, and you got the University of Utah players all going the same thing. Well, I'm going to close with this, George Washington. Just an amazing, amazing leader. And okay, just go with me, and we're going to give a strong close to this. The Continental Congress's erratic conduct of the war had exposed the weakness of all republics and the certain disaster that would befall post-war America unless Washington declared himself a king. Did you realize that that really was what many people were saying, is that now that Washington had defeated the enemy, that he should now set himself up as a king. That's exactly what was said by many. And there was even a conspiracy. Washington responded with a stern lecture to banish these thoughts from your mind. He denounced the scheme as big with the greatest mischiefs that can befall my country. And when his response linked to King George of England, King George said, if Washington resisted the monarchical mantle and retired, as he always said he would be the greatest man in the world. As it turns out, he was. And you've heard of the terrible movie, The Last Temptation of Christ, but this author called this The Last Temptation of Washington. In this culminating moment of his military career, Washington demonstrated that he was as immune to the seductions of dictatorial power as he was to smallpox. And, as was so often the case with his most dramatic decisions, the reason for his behavior were so deeply buried in his character that they functioned like a biological condition requiring no further explanation. And then he drafted this great speech which he gave to this conspiratorial group. And in that speech, he rose slowly to the podium and he reached inside of his jacket to pull out his prepared remarks. And I want you to just visualize this. And then Washington pauses. The gesture is almost certainly planned. And he pulls from his waistcoat a pair of spectacles, which were new on the scene. Sent to him recently by David Rittenhouse, the Philadelphia scientist. No one has ever seen Washington wear spectacles on a public occasion. He looks out to his assembled officers while adjusting the new glasses and says the famous line, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." That is the reason that there was only one man who ever could have been the first president of the United States of America. Now, I can tell you that no one here was born a leader. There was no doctor that ever said, "Congratulations, Mama, you just had yourself a leader." A boy or a girl maybe, but not a leader. Leaders are not born, they're made. And it's a decision. What is your presence worth on the field of battle? What is your integrity? How do you make decisions? How do you spend your time? What are your goals? How do you treat people? How do you react in difficult situations? How competent are you? How much humility do you have? How much do you listen and how well do you communicate? How much do you care about those that you serve? There is so much to learn and to practice about becoming a disciplined, capable leader. And yet, that is exactly what you will become. And my prayer for each one of you is that it will be the righteous desire of your heart to become magnificent leaders in your own sphere. And I express gratitude for the opportunity of being here today. Thank you.
Thanks again, Scott, for being here, and we look forward to seeing you all during the rest of this week as you empower your dreams. Thanks again. Oh, wait. Sorry, we do have handouts here for you. We'll give it to you at the door so you can know more of the events happening.